human brain is the most powerful organ in our body. It's also the most complex one. Have you ever wondered if the thinking process that goes on in your brain foolproof? Have you ever wondered if the decisions that you take are fair and objective? If the answer to these questions is yes, then you are at the right place. Greetings from Natural Resource Center, Sri Ram College of Commerce, University of Delhi. Today, through this video course and module, we would be throwing light on the various limitations of the human brain. Limitations that bias our decision-making process and hence may lead to poor judgments. Forewarned is forearmed, and thus, knowing about these biases can actually help you to recognize them, correct them, and even exploit them to your benefit. Over millions of years of evolution, it's easy to believe that your brain would have improved the way it thinks. But the truth is, natural selection hasn't been nudging our brains to be more rational. In fact, it's been nudging our brains to keep us alive. And these two aren't always the same thing. The world is vastly complex, and humans have never before been bombarded with so much information on a daily basis. When you're making judgments and decisions about the world around you, you like to think that you are objective, logical, and capable of evaluating all the information that's available to you. But it's not possible for your brain to process all the information around you. Therefore, you must resort to mental shortcuts to make decisions quickly and effectively. These mental shortcuts pave the way for cognitive biases. What are these cognitive biases? A cognitive bias is often a result of your brain's attempt to simplify information processing. They are rules of thumb that help you make sense of the world and reach decisions with relative speed. If you had to think about every possible option while making a decision, it would probably take you a lot of time to make even the simplest of the choices. Because of the sheer complexity of the world around you and the amount of information in the environment, it is necessary sometimes to rely on these mental shortcuts that allow you to act quickly. These mental shortcuts and biases are not necessarily all bad. Psychologists believe that many of these biases serve an adapted purpose. This can be vital if you are facing a dangerous or a threatening situation. Imagine, you are walking down a dark alley and you spot a shadow that seems to be following you. A cognitive bias may lead you to assume that there is some danger and that you should exit the alley as quickly or as soon as possible. This dark shadow may have simply been caused by a flag waving in the breeze, but relying on mental shortcuts can often get you out of the way of danger in such kind of situations. If our brains were bad at spotting predators, running away from danger, and evaluating possible friends and enemies, then the human race would have died long ago. The trouble is, avoiding hungry lions is no longer the main task that we use our brains for. These days, we expect our brains to make rational decisions. Turns out that this is one thing that they're not so well equipped to do. A cognitive bias can be thought of as a systematic error in thinking that affects the decisions and judgments that people make. Some of these biases are related to the memory. The way you remember an event may be biased for a number of reasons, and that in turn can lead to biased thinking and biased decision making. Other cognitive biases might be related to the problems with your attention. Since attention is a limited resource, people have to be selective about what they pay attention to in the world around them. Because of this, subtle biases can creep in and influence the way you think about the world. Out of the multiple cognitive biases that restrict our brain, we would be discussing the following 6 biases in this module. The first is the anchoring bias. Second is the availability bias. Third is the sunk cost fallacy. Fourth is the cognitive ease and cognitive strain. Fifth is the peak end rule and duration neglect. And the last is the halo effect and horn effect. So let us now delve deeper into the mechanics of the functioning of the human brain. Starting off with the anchoring bias. What comes to your mind when you think about the word anchor? Most probably, you think of a heavy metal object attached to a chain which is used to move a ship to the sea bottom. And this is precisely what this term refers to in psychology as well. Anchoring is a term used to describe the common human tendency to rely heavily on the very first piece of information that they come across or that they learn. And this can have a serious impact on the decisions that they end up making. This first piece of information acts as an anchor, and to make final decisions, humans cling onto this anchor, using it as a reference point. Let's take a simple situation that you may come across in your daily life. You wish to buy a house in a particular area. The first house that you come across has all the features that you were looking for, and it is priced at rupees 5 crore. In an attempt to look for more options, you go a little further and find another similar house priced at rupees 4.8 crore. You seem to have found a better deal than the previous one and go ahead with your purchase. After all, you're saving a full rupees 0.2 crore on your purchase, right? Wrong. In reality, your decision to buy the second house is based on the first piece of information that you came across, that is, the price of the first house. You used rupees 5 crore as the anchor, a reference point. And when you come across a price which is lower than this, you think that you are at an advantage without even undertaking any further negotiations. You unknowingly ignore various other factors that may have helped you to decide an optimum price for the same property. Similarly, imagine a situation wherein you visit a restaurant to have your dinner. The sign in the window of the restaurant tells you that the dinner would be served in 10 minutes. After reading this sign, what if you had to wait for 15 minutes for your dinner to be served? You may grow impatient, you may grow frustrated, and these 15 minutes may seem to be a long time. However, if instead the sign on the restaurant says that there is a waiting time of 30 minutes, then the same 15 minutes may seem easy to pass and may appear to be a short duration. You are the same person. The time of 15 minutes remains the same. Then why did your behavior change? The reason lies in your brain's tendency to anchor itself to the number that you see. In the first scenario, you anchor yourself to 10 minutes. A waiting time over and above these 10 minutes may make you impatient because this 10 is your reference point. In the second scenario, 30 minutes become your reference point, and hence you are willing to wait anything up to 30 long minutes for your dinner to be served. This is also the reason why various e-commerce platforms, restaurants, delivery agents, and the like often specify a service duration which is longer than the actual time needed to provide you that particular service. We tend to stubbornly cling to a number once we hear it and evaluate all the offers based on the previous number, even if that isn't the most relevant bit of information. But this is not it. As shocking as it may sound, results from various behavioral experiments suggest that seemingly unrelated information can act as anchors that influence decision making. Take, for example, one of the most famous experiments conducted by Daniel Kahneman. Under this experiment, several judges with more than 15 years of experience were first asked to read a case about a woman who had been caught stealing. They were then asked to roll a dice, which was rigged to land either on a 3 or a 9, although the judges were unaware of the biasness of the dice. As soon as the judges rolled the dice and the dice landed, they were asked two questions. The first question was, would this sentence the woman to a term greater than or less than the number on the dice? Second question was, what is the exact prison sentence in months that the woman should be subject to? The results were surprising. The judges whose dice landed on a 3 sentenced the woman to 5 months on an average, whereas the judges who rolled a 9 assigned an average sentence of 8 months. This is no coincidence. The number on the dice, although unrelated to the case, acts as an anchor to make the decision about the duration of sentence for the stealing woman. And this bias even affected judges who had an immense experience in their field. If this still seems like a coincidence to you, let's describe another experiment. Under this experiment, researchers held up items such as a bottle of wine or a textbook or a pen and then described in detail how great the item was to the participants. Then, each participating student was asked to write down the last 2 digits of his or her social security number, assuming that this was the price of the item. For example, if the last 2 digits of the social security number were 11, then the item was priced at $11. If the last 2 digits were 88, the price was $88. After they wrote down the pretended price, the students were asked to bid on the items. Sure enough, the anchoring effect scrambled the students' ability to judge the value of the items. People with high social security numbers paid up to 346% more than those with low social security numbers. For example, people with numbers from 80 to 99 paid on an average $26 for an item, while those with social security numbers ranging from 0 to 19 paid around $9. Social security numbers were the anchor in this experiment. The researchers could just as well have asked for the current temperature or the manufacturer's suggested retail price. Any question, in fact, would have created the anchor and would be used as the reference point. Does that seem rational? Of course not. The anchoring bias is a part and parcel of our day-to-day activities. It can influence how much we are willing to pay for a product that we are purchasing or buying for the first time, as is clear from the earlier example on the house purchase that we discussed. It can influence your salary negotiations with your employer as well. You may hesitate to make an initial offer to your employer, but research suggests that being the first one to lay down your cards on the table might actually be the best way to go forward. Whoever makes the first offer has the edge, since the anchoring effect will essentially make that number the starting point for all the further negotiations. The anchoring effect has an impact on many other areas of our daily lives, beyond financial decisions as well. For example, if someone asks you, how long do you expect to live? Or, how much television should your children watch each day? You might answer these questions on the basis of your previously formed anchors based on the life expectancy of your parents or the number of hours of television that you yourself watched as a kid, respectively. As you can see, the anchoring effect has a powerful impact on the choices we make, from decisions about the thing we buy to decisions about everyday preferences to how to live your life. There are 2 simple methods that you can use to counteract the anchoring bias. First, conduct a proper research before undertaking a financial or a purchase decision, thereby avoiding any type of hunches. And the second, make the first bid and set it high. So the next time you are trying to make an important decision, give a little thought to the possible impact of the anchoring bias on your choices. Are you giving enough consideration to all the available information and options? Or are you biasing or basing your selection on existing anchor points? Coming on to the second bias, the availability bias. Let me ask you a simple question. Which job is more dangerous? Being a police officer or being a tree feller? Most of you would believe that the job of a police officer is obviously more dangerous. While high-profile police shootings might lead you to think that cops have more dangerous job, statistics actually suggest that tree fellers are more likely to die on the job as compared to cops. When it comes to making this type of judgments, our brain relies on two things. First is the ease of recall, and second is the retrievability of information. These two taken together make up the availability bias. In their seminal work concerning ease of recall, Tversky and Kahneman, two famous psychologists and researchers, asked their subjects that if a random word is taken from an English text, is it more likely that the word starts with a K, or is it more likely that the K is the third letter? In reality, a typical text contains twice as many words that have K as the third letter than K as the first letter. However, results indicated that participants to the study overestimated the number of words that began with the letter K and underestimated the number of words that had K as the third letter. This shows that people answer questions like this by comparing the availability of the two categories and assessing how easily they can recall such instances. In this particular study, it was easier for the participants to think of words that began with K more than the words with K as the third letter, and hence the overestimation and underestimation. In another experiment, the participants were divided into two groups. One group was asked to recall 6 examples of their assertive behavior, whereas the second group was asked to recall 12 examples of their assertive behavior. Once they were done, the participants were asked to rate their own assertiveness. The results showed that participants in the first group, on an average, rated themselves as more assertive. However, the participants of the second group rated themselves as less assertive. So, what was happening in the brain of students in these two groups that led to such difference in ratings? In the first group, it was easy to retrieve 6 examples of assertive behavior, and hence students perceived themselves to be more assertive on an average. In the second example, or the second group, it was difficult for the students to retrieve 12 examples of assertive behavior, and their failure to do so made them believe that they are not assertive on an average. This study reflected that availability, retrievability of information has a huge impact on our judgment about ourselves and the world around us. These experiments suggest that when we make decisions, we tend to be swayed by what we remember. What we remember, in turn, is influenced by a multitude of factors. This availability bias occurs unconsciously and operates under the principle, if you can think of it, it must be important. Things that come to mind more easily are believed to be far more common and more accurate reflections of the real world. The problem is that certain events tend to stand out in our minds more than others, and hence they are more likely to be remembered. Extensive media coverage is one factor that makes a big difference. When rare events occur, they become much more visible to us as they receive heavy coverage by the media. And this you must have observed in your daily life as well. This means that we are more likely to recall them, especially in the immediate aftermath of that particular event. Because if the event is so unusual, it takes on a greater significance, which leads us to incorrectly assume that the event is much more common than it really is. However, please remember that recalling an event and estimating its real probability are two different things. Similarly, people remembered vivid events like plane crashes and lottery wins. This leads some of us to overestimate the likelihood that a plane will crash or that we will win a lottery. In these cases, the availability bias leads some people to avoid flying at all costs, and it leads others to rely on a big lottery win as a retirement plan. Moreover, we tend to remember things that we observed ourselves more easily than the things we only heard about. So, for example, if you personally know of several startups and all of them are successful, you are likely to overestimate the percentage of startups that actually succeed. Now, this would happen even if you have read statistics to the contrary. Similarly, after we see a movie about a nuclear disaster, we might become convinced that a nuclear war or accident is highly likely. After seeing a car overturned on the side of the road, we might believe that our own likelihood of getting into a car accident or any other accident for that matter is very high. And the longer we stay preoccupied with the event, the more available it will be in our mind and the more probable we will believe it to be. Now, how does it apply to other areas? In the world of HR, managers conducting performance appraisals often fall victim to the availability bias. Working from memory, vivid instances of an employee's behavior, either positive or negative, will be most easily recalled from memory. It will appear more numerous than commonplace incidents and will therefore be weighed more heavily in the overall performance appraisal of that particular employee. The recency of the events is also a factor. Managers give weight and much more weight to performance during the 3 months prior to the evaluation than to the previous 9 months of the entire evaluation period. The reason is that this recency is more available in our memory. In the world of finance, investors tend to make judgments of stocks based on having heard about them recently in the news, which is not a really good financial move. Definitely, the availability bias can distort our decision-making processes. However, on the other hand, this can be used by marketers to create experiences as well as products that leave a vivid impression on our memory. What this bias teaches us is that it's not a very good idea to rely on memories alone, but instead use hard facts and figures to make reasoned decisions. Let's move to the third bias, which is the sunk cost fallacy, and my personal favorite. Have you ever ordered too much food at a fancy restaurant and then overeat it just to get your money's worth? Or have you ever let unworn clothes clutter your closet just because they were expensive and hence you could not throw them out? Or have you ever let yourself stick to a long-term relationship even though it's gone sour, trying to make things better over and over again? If you have experienced a version of any of these, congratulations. You fell victim to the sunk cost fallacy. Sunk costs are a favorite subject of the economists. Simply put, sunk costs are payments or investments which have gone, they have slipped our hands, and these can never be recovered. Therefore, such payments, such investments, such costs should not be considered while taking future decisions. Now, a well-built computer would never make a decision which took sunk costs into account. but you would. As an emotional human, your aversion to loss and risks often leads you right into the sunk cost fallacy. When you lose something permanent, it hurts. And the drive to mitigate this negative emotion leads you to some strange behaviors. Individuals commit the sunk cost fallacy when they continue a behavior as a result of previously invested resources. Now, these resources can be money, time, energy, efforts, or even pain that you have already undertaken in the past. All of these sunk costs influence your behavior, although they should not. The fun fact is, research suggests that not only humans, but even rats and mice are sensitive to sunk costs after they have made the decision to pursue a reward and put in efforts for the same. Most of you must have heard about a tale from Mahabharata, an ancient Indian epic, wherein Yudhishthir, the king of Hastinapur, loses his kingdom, wife, brothers in a game of gamble. This tale itself is a classic example of the sunk cost fallacy. It incentivized the king to continue the game in the hope of negating the previous losses. Sunk cost fallacy in play. A 1985 experiment has demonstrated the tendency of humans to go fuzzy when sunk costs come along. Under this experiment, subjects were asked to assume that they had spent $100 on a ticket for a ski trip in city A. But soon after, they found a better ski trip in city B for $50 and bought a ticket for this trip too. They then asked the people in the study to imagine that the two trips overlapped and the tickets couldn't be refunded or resold. Which one do you think they chose? The $100 good vacation or the $50 great vacation? Over half of the people in the study went with the more expensive trip, that is, the trip worth $100. It may not have promised to be as fun, but the loss seemed greater. That's the fallacy at work. The money is gone no matter what. You can't get it back. The fallacy prevents you from realizing that the best choice is to do whatever promises the better experience in the future, not the one which negates the feeling of loss in the past. But why do you become an easy victim to the sunk cost fallacy? It seems that there is an imbalance between losses and gains in your mind. Since all decisions involve uncertainty about the future, the human brain that you use to make decisions has evolved an automatic and unconscious system for judging the decisions on how to proceed when a potential for loss arises. Humans place much more urgency on avoiding the threats than they do on maximizing the opportunities. And over time, the prospect of losses has become a much more powerful motivator on your behavior than the promise of gains. Whenever possible, you try to avoid losses of any kind. And when comparing losses with gains, you don't treat them equally. This strong aversion to loss makes you go forward and try to undo any losses, past investments, and commitments that you have undertaken. What we don't understand as humans is what's done is done. There's nothing we can do to regain money that's lost. And pursuing something that makes us unhappy not only isn't going to get our money back, but it's also going to make us worse off. We just end up digging a deeper hole for ourselves. Well, if this is the case, how do you free yourself from the sunk cost fallacy? We fall victim to the sunk cost fallacy because we are emotionally invested in whatever money, time, efforts, or any other resource that we have committed to in the past. The most important step to freeing yourself from making poor decisions based on sunk costs is to recognize the logical fallacy. Simply being aware of it will help you tremendously in making more rational decisions in the future. In short, you should stop throwing good money after bad money in the hope of getting the bad money back.